Solving quadratics by factoring or the square root method in Algebra 2. First, we're going to look at solving by factoring, and this is really just one extra step from factoring in general. So on the left side here is I have the steps we're going to be using to solve this, and here's an example problem. So if you want to get a piece of paper and pause the video to copy all this down, go ahead and do that. The first step is we need to make sure that the equation equals 0. And in this case, it does. So we are good there. Next, we need to go to step 2, which is to factor. And remember, our GCF needs to come first. This is when we talk about our 4 steps. The first one was our GCF. The second one was by grouping. The third one was when we play the game. And the fourth one was our special cases. So when I go to factor this, I need to first see, is there a GCF for all 3? Can I divide them all by a number? No. And they don't all have x's. So I can't take a GCF. The next step is, can I group? Not yet, because I still only have 3 terms. So I have to play my game. Since there's no number in the front, I can just go to the last number and make my list of 21. So what multiplies to 21? I can do 1 times 21, or I can do 7 times 3. I can do -1 times -21, and -7 times -3. Next, I'm checking which one of these will add to a -10. And that's -7 and -3. So now I'm going to rewrite my equation. X squared minus 7x minus 3x plus 21 equals 0. So the factoring steps have not changed. Now that I have 4 terms, split it in half, look at the GCF of the first 2, which in this case is x. So x goes outside, and I'm left with x minus 7. The second group, I see the first term is negative, so I know I have to take a negative GCF, and in this case it's -3. So -3 goes to the outside, and we're left with x minus 7. So I know I'm on the right track because I have x minus 7 and x minus 7. So I know one of my factors is x minus 7. Remember, the other factor is my GCFs. So that is x minus 3, and all that still equals 0. I haven't solved anything, all I did was factor. Now if you remember, we talked about, because there was no number in front of x squared, once you found your numbers, you could have gone straight to your factors with x minus 7 and x minus 3. And if you didn't remember that, that's fine. We just factor. So we've done step 1, we've done step 2. Now step 3, set each factor equal to 0. Each parenthesis is a factor. So we're going to say x minus 7 equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0. And then we just need to solve. So we would add 7 and get x to equal 7, add 3, and we get x to equal 3. So there are my 2 answers for this problem. There's 2 more examples. So again, step one when I'm going through this is I need it to equal 0. This one does not equal 0, so we need to add 9 to each side. So that gives me x squared plus 10x and then plus 9 is now equal to 0. So that was my step one, getting it equal to 0. Step two is factoring. Because there's no number in front, I'm going to go to the last number, which is 9. I'm going to make my chart. So what multiplies to 9? I have 1 times 9, 3 times 3, -1 times -9, -3 times -3. Which one of these will add to a positive 10? And that is 1 and 9. Now, knowing that I don't have anything in the front, and I found my numbers, I could skip right down to my factors of x plus 1 and x plus 9 equals 0. I am going to go through the whole factoring process if you still need to do that. So if I'm factoring, I would rewrite it with x squared plus 1x plus 9x plus 9 equals 0. Split it in half. My GCF of the first two is x, which leaves me with x on the outside and an x plus 1 on the inside. GCF of the second two is 9. So 9 on the outside, x plus 1 on the inside. And again, my parentheses match up, so that creates first factor. Then my GCFs create the second factor. All I have done is factor. Now in order to solve, I set each factor equal to 0. Now after that, I solve each equation. So in this one, I'm going to subtract 1, and I get x to equal -1. And over here, I'm going to subtract 9, and I get x to equal -9. And the second equation. So the second equation already equals 0. Now I'm looking, I have to go through my factoring steps. Is there a GCF between these? And this one there is, because they both have an x. So I want to take my GCF out first, x, and then parentheses x minus 9 equals 0. Well, from here, there's nothing else to factor on the inside. So these happen to be my only two factors. So I'm going to set each part equal to 0. I'm going to say x equals 0 and x minus 9 equals 0. X equals 0 is already solved. Add the 9. Here we get x to equal 9. And that is an overview on solving by factoring. Now the other part we have to talk about is solving by the square root method. So this one looks a little bit different. As you can see, there are parentheses in this one. So our first step here is to get the exponent all by itself. So for my example, the first thing I want to do is divide each side by 2. You cannot distribute with an exponent. So that will cancel the 2 out, divide the other side by 2. So now I am left with parentheses x minus 5 squared is equal to 4. Now the second step is, after we get the exponent by itself, we need to square root each side. That's how we get rid of the exponent. So I take the square root, and I'm going to take the square root. After we take the square root, we have to use this plus or minus sign. So again, taking the square root only gets rid of my exponent. So I'm left with x minus 5 equals the square root of 4, which is plus or minus 2. Because positive 2 times positive 2 equals 4, and negative 2 times negative 2 equals 4. That's why we're getting a positive and a negative. Step 3 then says set up two equations and solve. So my two equations are going to be x minus 5 equals positive 2 and x minus 5 equals negative 2. And then we can solve. So we'll add the 5 and we get x to equal 7. And then we can add our 5 and we get x to equal 3. So we're going to do two more examples. Again, if this is going too fast, make sure you can pause the video and rewind it. If you feel you have the hang of it and you want to pause the video and try it on your own, you can do that as well. So our first step is to get the exponent by itself. In this case, we have a fraction. So to get rid of a fraction, we're going to multiply by the bottom number, which is 3. And multiply this side by 3. So again, that only cancels out the bottom. And I'm lucky because this one leaves me with a 1 in the front, which I don't really need to write since it's the number 1. So it leaves me with x plus 4 squared is equal to 21. Now my next step was to get rid of the exponent. So I'm going to square root. So that leaves me with x plus 4 equals, 21 is not a perfect square. If I put it in my calculator, I'll get a decimal. So we're just going to leave it as plus or minus square root of 21. The third step was to set up my two equations. So I'm going to have x plus 4 equals positive square root of 21 and x plus 4 equals negative square root of 21. Then we just need to solve. So I'm going to subtract 4, subtract 4. So I get x to equal, now the square root of 21 is not a like term as negative 4. So we can't just subtract. So we're just going to write, it's a negative 4 and it was our positive square root of 21. Or if you wanted to write it as square root of 21 minus 4. That's fine too. I will accept either one. Same on the other side, subtract the 4. And we get x to equal negative 4 minus the square root of 21. Or you can say the negative square root of 21 minus 4. Either way is acceptable. Alright, last example. Again, we need to start by getting our exponent by itself. In this case, we have two things we need to get rid of. So we're going to first start by subtracting the 8. So now that leaves me with 4 times parentheses x minus 1 squared is equal to 20. Then I need to divide each side by 4. So that gives me parentheses x minus 1 squared is equal to 5. Now that I have the exponent by itself, I have to take the square root of each side. So that leaves me with x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus. You cannot take the square root of 5, so we just leave it as the square root of 5. Now we set up our two problems. So x minus 1 equals positive square root of 5, and x minus 1 equals negative square root of 5. We add the 1, we get x to equal 1 plus the square root of 5, or again, you could write it as square root of 5 plus 1. This is the proper mathematical way to write it, but either way is acceptable. Add the 1, and we get x to equal 1 minus the square root of 5, or again, negative square root of 5 plus 1. But this first way is the proper way to write it in math.